Good morning, comic book fans. Welcome back to Comics in 5 Minutes. I'm your ever-loving host, Shorty, and today, in the middle of jamming as many reviews in as I can into this week, so there's loads of stuff in, I'm going to review Universal Monsters Dracula. This one is an easy one for me to review because it was on my pull list already. And it's not because it's Dracula, and it's not because it's written by James Tynion IV, although those are both excellent reasons to buy a comic book. It's because the artwork is by Martin Simmons, who is spectacular. By all ways you can measure how good art is in terms of actual ability, emotional resonance, how effective it is at telling the story, everything about artwork that you might like in comic books, he is great at it. That was enough for me to put on my list. Because, yes, Tynion is a fantastic writer. There's no denying that. I have literally picked up comic books because he is the writer of them. But it's James Tynion doing a story of Dracula based on the Universal Movies version of Dracula, inspired by the novel Dracula by Bram Stoker. And I've seen the original movie, I've read the original book, and I've seen the movie, and I've read a comic book based on the movie based on the book, and I've seen the TV series and a whole bunch of other versions. Dracula is nothing new for me. I've been a fan since I was a teenager. But one of the things I was a fan of, which wasn't that common at the time, was Renfield. I found him a fascinating character. When I got older, started playing vampire role-playing games, the idea of a Renfield-type character did interest me even more. And as time's gone on, he's become more popular, more people know about him. There's an entire movie about a Renfield came out fairly recently. But for me, he's always been interesting to me because he is a deplorable character. You can look at vampires, specifically Dracula, as a critique of inherited power and wealth. Basically, the aristocracy, royalty, or just very, very wealthy people in general. And there's ways you can tell interesting stories through that. Bloodstained Teeth recently did one about an emergent middle class, which I really enjoyed. This one, issue 1, focusing quite heavily on the Renfield character. This is a traitor, a deplorable waste of humanity, somebody who has turned their back on humanity to hopefully grab hold of, or at least bask in the reflected glory of a better person, or at least to me who he thinks is better, more powerful than himself. This is not an unusual thing in the real world. It happens far more than I'd like to admit. If you want examples of it in this country alone, we can see there's a whole bunch of people who whose parents probably really struggled in horrible working class conditions, maybe council houses, maybe never even dreamed of owning their own house, maybe couldn't afford to put heating on and had terrible diet and had to rely on a nascent NHS, who grow up and think that people who lived in mansions, who grew up with butlers and nannies, have the interest of the working class art, and are actually going to lie about it and demonise other poor people in an effort to show that they deserve to be part of this grouping, or at least to bask in its reflected light, because they see them as better than them. They understand they're never going to have even a portion of their power, but if they can just sit near it, their lives will be better. That's Renfield. Now, I know that is just a take on it, and yes, it's my interpretation, but as I've often said, art is great because we can interpret it. We can look at it and see what it says to us, what we feel it is trying to get across, and I'm not sure that is what Tynion and Simmons are trying to do. Maybe they're not. But when we see Renfield, it is this realisation that he is the most deplorable, disturbing creature in the comic book. He looks less than human, a shadow of human, a parody of humanity. When we see Dracula in some absolutely spectacular double-page spreads with rich colours and fantastic layouts, he evokes glory. He is fabulous. He is everything that we should look up to, and that's fine. That's kind of what Dracula is supposed to be through all of this. He's also a blood-sucking parasite, but he's supposed to look like he isn't. Renfield looks worse than even the humans that Dracula feeds off, and it is done so sublimely. I mean, the pale face, even the lack of facial features, the eyes that look like holes, not holes to a soul or windows to a soul, but just a vacant, gaping holes in his head. His mouth, which looks disturbing, crawling in insects, living in filth. He is a traitor, and it's very hard to be sympathetic with him. We could say that he's just as much of a victim of Dracula or vampires as other people are, and yes, again, you can see that as a real-world comparison, but it doesn't mean he is sympathetic, and the way he's portrayed this is fantastic. Now, yes, we do have to also talk about Tynion. He does a masterful job as well. He is dealing with something here where he's not just taking script from a book. Maybe he's taken from a movie. I've never actually seen the Universal Dracula movie, so I could be wrong. But he's clearly still having some fun, and he understands the modes of speech and the patois. He's doing that really effectively. And again, maybe this is because it's the Universal version, but what we don't get is the Jonathan Harker travelogue, which I don't mind at all. It'd be nice to see Simmons take on some big, fantastic Transylvanian castles, but I kind of like the fact that we drop into the action at a place where it's a little bit more exciting for like London-based stuff. Dracula is already here, the boat has already arrived in Whitby with a whole bunch of people dead, and Renfield is the person who's been basically detained because I think he's done it. It drops in a real interesting point for the story, and I genuinely want to carry on reading it. I'm very glad I added it to my list. I already knew I was going to be, but this is me saying that if you were on the fence this one, you weren't too sure, maybe like me, you've read a lot of vampire stories, a lot of Dracula stories, maybe you thought this might not be worth taking another shot, taking another dip in that well, go for it. It is absolutely worth your time, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. That's it for me right now. I am going to try and get one, maybe two more reviews in this week if I can find the time. But tomorrow I've got to go and watch. Well, I'm going to go and watch a rugby match. England are playing at my local town, so we'll see what I can do. But until then, look after each other, everyone. Stay safe. Bye.